World War II was not only a clash of nations and ideologies, but also of machines. Tanks, ships, and aircraft became icons of the conflict. Some became legends, others remained obscure. Yet the story of the Consolidated B-24 Liberator is one of paradox. Built in greater numbers than any other American bomber in history, flown in every theater of the war, adapted to every role imaginable, and yet overshadowed in memory by the B-17 Flying Fortress. The Liberator was ungainly, difficult to fly, and unloved by many of its crews, but it was indispensable. It was the war's ultimate workhorse, the unsung giant that pounded enemy industry, patrolled oceans, supplied armies, and carried the burden of Allied air power. To understand the B-24 is to understand the scope of American industrial might and the sacrifices of the men who flew in the most produced heavy bomber of all time. In the late 1930s, the world stood on the brink. Nazi Germany, only recently restrained by the Versailles Treaty, had rebuilt its armed forces at alarming speed. Japan had plunged deeper into China, and Italy had embarked on its own imperial ventures. To military planners in the United States, isolationism was no longer a shield. The Army Air Corps, America's fledgling air arm, studied the lessons of World War I and emerging doctrines of strategic bombing. Aircraft would be the decisive weapon of the next war, they believed, and bombers would be the spearhead. The Air Corps wanted aircraft that could strike deep into enemy territory, beyond the range of fighters, destroying factories, railroads, and oil supplies. At the time, Boeing's B-17 was the pride of the fleet. Nicknamed the Flying Fortress for its multiple gun positions, it had first flown in 1935. The B-17 was advanced, but the Air Corps' vision demanded more. Longer range, higher speed, greater bomb load. In early 1938, the Air Corps issued a request: design a new heavy bomber to exceed the B-17's capabilities. Consolidated Aircraft Corporation, based in San Diego, answered. Consolidated was no stranger to large aircraft. Founded in the 1920s, it had produced flying boats for the Navy, including the PBY Catalina, which would go on to be one of the most famous patrol aircraft of the war. But Reuben H. Fleet, Consolidated's president, wanted more. When the Air Corps issued its bomber request, Consolidated's engineers, led by Isaac M. Ladden, made a bold choice. Instead of mimicking Boeing's rounded fuselage and thick wing, they gambled on a radical new design, the Davis wing. The Davis wing, designed by engineer David R. Davis, was long and narrow, with a high aspect ratio. It looked fragile, but it promised exceptional lift-to-drag efficiency. This meant the aircraft could fly faster and farther on the same power. Pairing the Davis wing with 4 Pratt & Whitney R-1830 Twin Wasp radial engines, Ladden's team created the prototype XB-24. Its fuselage was utilitarian, slab-sided, boxy, with a tricycle landing gear, unusual for its time. The cockpit sat high above the nose, giving the crew a commanding view. When the XB-24 first flew on December 29, 1939, it demonstrated speed superior to the B-17. Its maximum speed was over 300 miles per hour compared to the B-17's 270. It could carry more bombs over greater distances. On paper, it was everything the Air Corps wanted. But the design had compromises. The Davis wing made the aircraft less stable at high altitudes, and its stall characteristics were tricky. The Liberator would never be as easy to fly as the B-17. Yet in 1939, war was already raging in Europe, and performance was what mattered. The Army ordered the B-24 into production. Few could have foreseen just how many would be built. The entry of the United States into World War II transformed its industry into a war machine. Franklin Roosevelt's promise to make America the arsenal of democracy was embodied in the B-24 production program. Consolidated's San Diego plant could not meet demand alone. Contracts spread production across the nation. Consolidated San Diego, California, the original line. Consolidated Fort Worth, Texas, a major expansion plant. Douglas Aircraft, Tulsa, Oklahoma, subcontracted production. North American Aviation, Dallas, Texas, contributing lines. Ford Motor Company, Willow Run, Michigan, the most ambitious in Henry Ford's gamble. Willow Run deserves special mention. When the Army asked Henry Ford to produce B-24s, many doubted it could be done. Cars and airplanes were worlds apart in complexity. But Ford believed in mass production. He built an enormous plant west of Detroit, designed by Albert Kahn, covering 3.5 million square feet. The factory itself was a marvel. It had a mile-long assembly line, with aircraft slowly moving down stations where teams installed engines, wings, guns, and equipment. Workers included thousands of women, Rosie the Riveters, who replaced men sent to war. The workforce was diverse, drawn from across America, many of them unskilled before the war. Ford had to train them, standardize processes, and adapt auto industry techniques to precision aircraft assembly. Early production was chaotic. Aircraft rolled out of Willow Run riddled with defects. Ford mechanics and Army inspectors clashed. Critics called it Will It Run rather than Willow Run, but the system matured. By 1944, Willow Run was turning out one completed B-24 every 63 minutes. At its peak, it produced 650 per month. The plant alone built 8,685 aircraft. Across all plants, total B-24 production reached 18,482, more than any other bomber in history. This unprecedented scale meant the Liberator was available for every theater, every mission, and every experiment. The Liberator's combat career began with Britain. Even before Pearl Harbor, the Royal Air Force received B-24s under Lend-Lease. The RAF found the aircraft ideal for long-range patrols over the Atlantic. German U-boats had preyed on convoys in the mid-Atlantic Gap, out of reach of land-based planes. The B-24's range closed that gap. Armed with radar and depth charges, the RAF's Coastal Command B-24s became U-boat killers. German submariners soon came to dread the silhouette of the Liberator overhead. For the United States, the first combat came after December 7, 1941. In the Pacific, Liberators flew from Australia, striking Japanese bases. Their long legs allowed them to hit Rabaul, one of Japan's most formidable strongholds. As the Allies island hopped across the Pacific, the B-24 became the standard heavy bomber, where the B-17's shorter range limited its use. In Europe, the Liberator joined the B-17 in the strategic bombing campaign. From bases in England, the 8th Air Force pounded German cities, factories, and railroads. In Italy, the 15th Air Force relied heavily on Liberators to strike oil refineries, marshalling yards and ports across southern Europe and the Balkans. One of the most daring missions of the war was flown almost entirely by B-24s. On August 1, 1943, 177 Liberators took off from North Africa in Operation Tidal Wave. Their target, the oil refineries at Ploiești, Romania, which supplied a third of Germany's petroleum. The plan was audacious. A low-level daylight attack, flying at treetop height to surprise defenses. The result was chaos. Some formations became lost. Others hit targets out of sequence. German flak and fighters tore into the bombers. The sky filled with fireballs as Liberators exploded. Of the 177 that departed, only 88 returned, many riddled with holes. Over 500 men were killed, wounded, or captured. The raid inflicted damage, but at terrible cost. It demonstrated both the Liberator's ability to reach distant, vital targets and the immense risks faced by its crews. The B-24 fought in every corner of the war. Atlantic Theater, as the PB-4Y with the U.S. Navy and as RAF Liberators, the aircraft patrolled the ocean, closing the Black Pit where U-boats once roamed freely. Mediterranean, from bases in North Africa and Italy, Liberators struck Sicily, southern France, Greece, and the Balkans. Pacific, from Guadalcanal to the Philippines, B-24s carried the load of strategic bombing, eventually reaching Japan itself. China, Burma, India, Liberators flew over the hump, carrying supplies from India to China, and bombing Japanese positions across Burma and Indochina. Its versatility allowed it to be bomber, patrol plane, cargo hauler, reconnaissance platform, and even radar-equipped hunter. Few aircraft matched its adaptability. Flying a B-24 was not easy. Crews often preferred the B-17. The B-24's cockpit was cramped and noisy. Its control forces were heavy. At altitude, pilots wrestled the yoke. Landings were treacherous. The aircraft's long wings and high landing speed punished mistakes. It could carry 8,000 pounds of bombs, more than the B-17's typical load, but the extra weight and higher wing loading meant it was less forgiving in turbulence or flak bursts. Its fuel tanks were vulnerable. When hit, the aircraft often caught fire. For gunners, the slab-sided fuselage gave good fields of fire, but the Liberator was not as rugged as the B-17. Stories of flying fortresses limping home full of holes were common. The Liberator, hit in the wrong spot, often went down in flames. Yet crews also admired its range. It could take them to targets no other bomber could reach. Over the Pacific, crews learned to respect its ability to bring them home from missions over 1,000 miles away. A waist gunner from the 5th Air Force recalled, "We cursed the Lib every day. She leaked oil, she was hard to fly, and she didn't forgive mistakes. But she got us there and back. I never thought she'd be the one to save my life, but she did." So why, with all these achievements, is the B-24 overshadowed by the B-17? Partly it was image. The B-17 had flown earlier, and its reputation for ruggedness stuck. Its name, Flying Fortress, was dramatic, while Liberator was more abstract. Photographs of shot-up B-17s returning home became iconic propaganda. The Liberator's vulnerabilities, its tricky handling, its tendency to catch fire, earned it fewer legends. Crews trusted the Fortress more, and the Air Forces themselves emphasized the B-17 in press and film, making it the star of the bombing campaign. In truth, the B-24 flew more missions, dropped more bombs, and sank more ships, but it never captured the same mythic status. By 1945, the Liberator had become ubiquitous. Thousands crisscrossed the skies, a constant presence over oceans and continents. When victory came, however, its fate was swift and ignominious. Unlike the B-17, which lingered in service, the B-24 was rapidly retired. Its maintenance needs were higher, its flying characteristics less suited to peacetime training. Thousands were parked in desert boneyards and cut up for scrap. Within 2 years of the war's end, almost all were gone. Only a handful survived. Today, just a few flyable Liberators remain in museums and air shows. For an aircraft built in such numbers, its disappearance was almost total. The B-24 was not glamorous, it was not loved, but it was indispensable. It was the bomber that did the unglamorous work, the one that filled the gaps, reached the unreachable, and carried the war on its broad, boxy shoulders. It embodied the might of American industry, the ability to take 1 million individual parts, produced by thousands of workers in dozens of factories, and turn them into an aircraft every hour. It represented the sacrifice of its crews, who flew into flak and fighters in an aircraft they sometimes distrusted, but which ultimately brought many of them home. And it left behind a paradox, remembered less than the Fortress, but in truth, perhaps the most important bomber of World War II. The B-24 Liberator was and remains the forgotten giant. Today, when one of the few surviving Liberators lifts into the air at an air show, its broad wings glinting in the sun, spectators watch with awe. Few know that this ungainly aircraft once filled the skies in their thousands. Fewer still know how decisive it was to the war's outcome. The men who flew it, however, remember. They remember the roar of the twin wasps, the endless missions across oceans and mountains, the empty seats of comrades lost. They remember the aircraft they cursed and respected, the one that did the job when nothing else could. And perhaps in that memory, the Liberator finally takes its rightful place, not in the shadow of the flying fortress, but alongside it as an equal partner in the Allied victory. Thank you for watching. If we missed any part of this story, let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos from our channel.